Hey guys, Scott here. Today I want to talk about the perk Shoulder the Burden. It is a perk by Tori Kane. I don't know why I said by like she designed it like a Prada bag, but it is something that lets you basically trade your hook state to another teammate, typically used when one of your teammates getting tunneled out or something like that. You're playing with a friend that's not very good at the game. You want to give them a bonus life. It's a selfless perk that lets you basically just trade lives. And it released about 7 months ago, and just recently I saw a post on Twitter about someone saying that they don't understand how the perk is still in the game, implying it's like wildly overpowered to the point where it's breaking the game. And I was sitting there thinking about it, and I was realizing I don't think I have ever lost a single game to Shoulder a Burden in the 7 months it's been in the game. I cannot think of one occasion where it caused me to lose a match. Whereas, perks like Unbreakable, I can think of hundreds of examples of that actually happening. So to me, Shoulder the Burden has had zero impact on my ability to win matches, but people still swear by the fact that this perk is extremely, extremely good. So let's go over what it actually really, really does during a match. The trading of hook states is very, very strong. Obviously, that's a very powerful effect. The thing is, most people just do not use the perk correctly. The problem with that statement is if we're talking about how to actually discuss the balance of a perk, or the balance of really anything, you do kind of have to talk about how it's possibly used. What are the upper, limits of how it can be used? It's why we don't say Nurse is a shitty killer, because most people don't have good kill rates with Nurse, but in the right hands, Nurse is obviously the most busted thing killers have. So we do have to have some level of ease of use enter the conversation and some level of understanding that we need to balance things or discuss balance based on its potential. So from the potential side, yes, it's got extremely, extremely high potential. Shoulder the Burden is potentially one of the strongest perks in the entire game, especially when you're going against a very sweaty killer that's trying to tunnel someone out. Denying that kill is extremely, extremely impactful. So the upper limit, when used correctly, it's a very strong perk. And you could possibly even argue it's overpowered. But I do think the separate side of the argument needs to come in here is, how often is it going to be actually used to that amount? So I think the ease of use and how easy it is to use a perk to its effective maximum is also relevant to how strong it is in the game. Unless you're playing like literally in DBD League and you're, the 0.1% of the player base that is actually doing competitive DBD, most of this shit doesn't really apply to you. So I think you do need to talk about just the normal games that you're going to be playing almost every single time, because who cares about, the very tiny fraction of people that are playing in their own system with their own separate rules, to the point where it doesn't even matter because comp leagues have separate rulings. They have their own, innate ability to control what perks you're even allowed to use. So these things can be restricted or modified based on how they perceive the balance to be. So I think discussing it at that level is stupid. It's just pointless because it doesn't affect almost everyone playing the game. So we need to talk about it being used in regular matches. And in regular matches, almost nobody uses this correctly. First of all, almost nobody uses it. It's a very low pick rate. It's like the 56th most picked perk in the game. I think it's got like a 1.6% pick rate. Very, very, very low. Now, interestingly, the escape rate of the perk is actually decently high. It's actually like 36% when the average is more like 33, 34%. Now, you would think that's kind of backwards because it's a selfless perk. Because you're trading your hook state, people that are running it are more likely to die. It's why Old Object of Obsession had a lower escape rate, and we had the infamous, not terribly effective perk meme about it, because people that were running it were drawing the killers the attention like the entire game, and so they were more likely to die. But here, Shoulder the Burden is a selfless perk, yet still has a higher than average escape rate. And I think the main reason is the few people running the perk are just simply good at the game. They understand its value, they understand how to use it correctly, and on average, people that are just simply better at Survivor are just going to escape more. Whereas perks like Left Behind and Soul Survivor have higher escape rates because they're just selfish perks that let you escape more. Shoulder the Burden is a selfless perk, but it's usually only used by very good players that on average will just do better in a match. So I thought that statistic was interesting. But in terms of the actual impact it has on a match, like I said, I personally cannot think of a single time in 7 months that I've lost because of it. Now, I do try to 12 hook my matches, and that might be why we're having some differing, outcomes here. If you're like hard tunneling at 5 gens or something, then sure, I could see how this perk seems way more of a big deal to you. Now, I've also heard the argument that even if you're not tunneling and you are going for 12 hooks, it could still be used to really cut off some momentum. For example, let's say I have 2 hooks on one guy, 2 hooks on another guy, 2 hooks on another guy, but 0 on the last guy. The guy's been hiding, I can't find him, and he's the guy with shoulder the burden. Even though I've been spreading hooks really nicely, I haven't found that guy. That guy uses shoulder the burden to unhook somebody that I'm in the area of or something like that. Now that guy's not on death hook anymore. And so we're in a scenario where even though I'm playing nice, that guy is still going to live a lot longer now because the next time I hooked him, he would have been dead. And although I almost have max hooks on everybody, I don't have quite max hooks, so it can still be a benefit there too, and that is true. I just don't think that's overpowered. I think it's very good. It's a great perk for sure. I just don't think it's overpowered and worthy of saying this needs to be removed from the game in that particular example. However, if you are not going for 12 hooks and you are hardcore tunneling, yeah, this is going to be way more impactful. And I'm not going to be stupid here. I understand a lot of the killers in the game are just simply not strong enough to 12 hook. If you're going against equally skilled opponents, I'd say half the entire roster can't 12 hook. They're just not strong enough. And I really, really understand that. I'm not pretending that I'm some beacon of humbleness for like, all right, 12 hook every game with perkless Trapper. Of course not. I'm going to get my ass beat if I'm going against, equal skill opponents. So I understand, but I feel like that's more of a killer balancing issue than a shoulder the burden issue. And that's more we need to buff the entire bottom half of the roster of killers, not nerf a perk like Shoulder the Burden, which in theory is great for deterring people from aggressively tunneling like early in the match. I like it for that reason. I think it's honestly healthy for the game, and I honestly wish more people would use that. But really, it's really hard to discuss how impactful the perk is and should be due to differing skill levels and the wide disparity in how strong killers are. It seems completely fair against killers like, Billy and Nurse and Blight and, whatever. Like any of the top 10 killers that are like hardcore tunneling, you're like, yeah, this perk is great. No one's even going to complain about it. But then you play the bottom half and it's like they have to work so much harder to get those downs. And a lot of the time against good players, their only hope of winning is getting someone out a bit earlier, which could be rendered impossible with the idea of shoulder the burden. So I get it. It seems like no one is really wrong in this scenario because it depends on where you're approaching the discussion. It's almost like, is the game killer or survivor sided is never really the right question because it's neither. It's sided to whoever brings the strongest shit. If survivors bring a bad map offering and the killer brings a weak killer, it's survivor sided. If the killer is a blight and gets, a very small map or something like that, it's going to be killer sided. It just depends on what people bring into these matches. And Dead by Daylight has always been sided to just who brings the strongest thing. And so it's the same exact kind of discussion here. It's really hard to come to a conclusion about whether the perk is too strong or too weak or anything, because it can be everything. It can be too strong, too weak, non-impactful, way too impactful. It just depends on the circumstances of the current match. And I think that makes the conversation, unfortunately, not really have a real conclusion. It's entirely possible that to you, the perk is seen as wildly overpowered. But to me, I don't really main any of the bottom tier killers. And I try to spread 12 hooks. So this perk is a complete non-issue to me. Never negatively impacted me a single time. So again, no one's really wrong here. I wish I could have a more definitive answer to this. Is it overpowered? Is it not? I don't know. It depends on what you're going against, and I wish there was something more conclusive I can say to that. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think about it. It definitely comes down to play styles and the killers that you're using, because even the stronger killers can afford to spread hooks more. It's kind of like an unfortunate way of looking at the game. The strongest killers can afford to play nicer, and the weaker killers have to play meaner if they want to win against the same type of opponents. But that's just sort of the nature of the game. The final argument I would say here is that's not really a problem about Shoulder the Burden, the perk. It's a problem about half the killer roster simply being too weak. And if they were all kind of on the same level as Springtrap or something like that, who's like a pretty decent but not overpowered killer, if they were all kind of at that level, I think this discussion would be far more sided to Shoulder the Burden is a very good perk, but not overpowered by any means. But because half the killer roster simply can't afford to spread hooks, it's, going in circles here, but you get what I'm trying to say. That's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.